Good day, everyone, and welcome. Thank you all for joining us virtually here at the National Archives YouTube channel as we kick off our celebration of Sunshine Week 2022. I'm happy to be back in the McGowan Theater after 2 years of being physically distanced. Welcome to our distinguished guests who are joining us in person today in the McGowan Theater at the flagship National Archives building in Washington, D.C. I'm Martha Murphy. I'm the Deputy Director of the Office of Government Information Services, and I'm representing the office on behalf of our Director, Alina Simo, who could not be here today. OGIS is the federal FOIA ombudsman and part of the National Archives and Records Administration. We resolve FOIA disputes, identify methods to improve compliance with the statute, and educate our stakeholders about the FOIA process. Each year, we celebrate Sunshine Week by promoting dialogue about the importance of open government and access to information, values that are central to the mission of the National Archives and Records Administration. We've put together an exciting program this afternoon. It's my honor and pleasure to introduce this distinguished panel. Archivist of the United States, David Ferriero, Librarian of Congress, Dr. Carla Hayden, and philanthropist and National Archives supporter, David Rubenstein, who will moderate what promises to be a terrific conversation. David Ferriero was confirmed as the 10th Archivist of the United States on November 6, 2009. Early in 2010, David committed the National Archives to the principles of open government, transparency, participation, and collaboration, which are the very values we are celebrating today. Relatedly, David has been a steadfast supporter of our office, the Office of Government Information Services, and the work that we do as the Federal FOIA Ombudsman's Office. We have been extremely grateful for his sustained support and leadership. David will be retiring next month, and I'm grateful that he held out to participate today in our Sunshine Week event. We will truly miss you, David. Dr. Carla Hayden was confirmed as the 14th Librarian of Congress on July 13th, 2016. Dr. Hayden oversees the largest library in the world with millions of books, recordings, photographs, newspapers, maps, and manuscripts in its collections. Under Dr. Hayden's leadership, the library is adopting a digital forward strategy that harnesses technology to bridge geographical divides and expand the library's reach. Indeed, one of the library's main goals is throwing open the treasure chest. That strategy dovetails so nicely with one of the National Archives' strategic goals to make access happen. I'm thrilled to have the Archivist of the United States and the Librarian of Congress here to discuss our American treasures. Facilitating this conversation is David Rubenstein. Mr. Rubenstein is a generous supporter of the National Archives and its foundation. He received the National Archives Foundation's Records of Achievement Award in 2011. For his loan of the 1297 Magna Carta, as well as a rare stone engraving of the Declaration of Independence to the National Archives for public display. The David M. Rubenstein Records of Rights permanent exhibit at the National Archives features the 1297 Magna Carta and tells much more of the American story by linking the documents to the US Charters of Freedom and to modern day struggles to perfect democracy, focusing on the experiences of African Americans, women, and immigrants. Mr. Rubenstein is co-founder and managing director of the Carlyle Group, a global alternative asset manager. I know you share my excitement in hearing today from our distinguished guests. We welcome you, and over to you, David Rubenstein.
Thank you very much. Thank you, David and Carla, for being here today. And as we talk today, there is a lot of sunshine outside, I noticed. I wonder whether that was indicative of God's view that it was a good time to have Sunshine Week, but let's assume that it was. As I read the newspapers today, I read, David, that Tom Brady had decided to retire and then unretire.
I read that.
So I'm wondering whether there is any chance that you might unretire.
Too early to tell. We'll see. We'll see how Tom makes it.
Okay, so you're scheduled to retire April 30th, but you could reverse your decision, right?
No, I don't think so. This would be a family problem.
Oh, okay. So,
People
well,
are depending upon that date.
all right, but I know a lot of people would be not upset if you unretired the way Tom Brady is. So I'll try to see if I can arrange Tom Brady to give you a call to
Oh,
kind of
good.
say unretiring is not such a bad thing.
I will welcome that call.
So for those people that are not familiar with the National Archives, when was it actually created? And before it was created, what do we do with all the records of the government?
Well, it's a good thing Carl is sitting here because it wasn't until 1934 that the legislation was signed by FDR creating the National Archives. And before that, all the records were scattered, around Washington, D.C. in various attics and basements. And a lot of them were at the Library of Congress.
So the National Archives didn't really exist before. So like if somebody was in the government under George Washington or James Madison, they might file something somewhere and we don't have it, or maybe we have some of it. And now it's more systematic, right? We have everything.
Well, we aim to have everything. That doesn't mean we necessarily have everything. And as you've read in the papers recently, not everything is under control. But our goal is to control everything that's created in the executive branches, in the executive branch agencies, in the White House.
So why do we need to have all these records anyway? Because what's the point of having all these records? And do we need all these records, all these millions and millions of documents? What's the point of it?
The point is to make sure that the American people can hold their government accountable for its actions, and hopefully that we can all learn from our past by studying what happened before us. And this is the evidence to do that investigation.
Now, when this building, the National Archives main building, was opened, it had a space reserved for the U.S. Constitution
Are you ready for
and
this?
the Declaration of
yes.
Independence. And at that time, those documents were at the Library of Congress, and the Librarian of Congress said over his dead body, would
Exactly.
he let those documents come here? So how'd they get here? Did he die or what
He
happened?
died. He died.
Well, no.
He died.
Well,
Yes, he did. He was dead when Harry Truman finally said, "Get that document where it belongs."
well, that was unfortunate.
Okay,
However,
so-
but the
Well-
tanks coming up to the wonderful photographs of, and they're online, of tanks coming up to the steps of the iconic Thomas Jefferson building at the Library of Congress.
To wrest that document away from
get
you.
the documents. Now, we found
sent it-
later, though.
Well, they sent a tank up to protect them, and they brought it down from the Library of Congress and here. And now the original copy of the Constitution, the original copy of the Bill of Rights, and the original copy of the Declaration of Independence are here. Is that right?
That's right.
And there's a rumor that if there's a nuclear explosion somewhere, they go underground so they can never be destroyed. Can you comment on that?
Can't comment.
Can't comment on
We
that.
don't
That's
talk about
national
security.
Okay.
and
So
that's
David,
one of
you
the-
are by background a librarian. You were the head of the New York Public Library, and even more importantly, the head of the Duke University Library.
Much more important.
Much more important. Now, Carla, you are a professional librarian, a graduate of the University of Chicago, PhD in library matters, and you were the head of the Enoch Pratt Library in Baltimore for, what, 23 years?
Yes.
And so when you were asked to be the Librarian of Congress by President Obama, did you think it was unusual that they would ask somebody who was actually a librarian? Because we haven't had librarians of Congress who were librarians before very much.
2 times before, since 1802, and both were directors or librarians at large public libraries, one Cleveland Public and the other in Boston Public, but it'd been 70 years.
So it's been 70 years since we had a librarian to be the head of the Library of Congress, but how many women have there been who are librarians of Congress before you?
Well, this is Women's History Month, so I'm the first woman.
Okay.
And librarianship is one of the, what they call the 4 feminized professions, where about 85 to 90% of the workforce is female. However, the top management doesn't always reflect that. So I'm the first female and then the first person of color. So I'm a twofer.
So you're
Or
3 things. You're a
threefer.
librarian,
I'm a threefer.
so very unusual. Okay, so, all right, but actually, why does the Congress need a library? Do they read that much?
That's a question like he was asking you about nuclear, very similar. Yes, because the Library of Congress was actually started in 1800 and it was about 600 law books. right here in DC, because there was the thought that they might have to refer to some text. And as Thomas Jefferson said, when he sold his library to Congress after an unfortunate fire, 1812.
We mean, well, you say
the
unfortunately, the
British.
British invaded Washington. They burned down the Congress and they where the Library of Congress was. So they
And
burned all
they
the
used
books,
some of the
right?
books too. I saw the.
Okay, so Thomas Jefferson sold
Sold
his
his,
library.
and at that time, 1814, he had the largest personal library in the United States. It's about 6,000 volumes. It included the Quran, books on horticulture, and all different subjects, different languages. And he said there's no topic to which a member of Congress should not have occasion to refer. And that started the idea that members of Congress needed more than just a few law books. They needed to know more about
Okay, but
everything.
today,
Oh,
is the Library of Congress only for members of Congress?
it is for everyone. The Library of Congress has a special unit that grew out of that service to Congress, especially called the Congressional Research Service. And they're a group of, we call them our special forces. They're librarians and experts in every field, and they give nonpartisan, objective information directly to Congress. Congress is the only body that can actually check out anything, but it is the nation's library.
So if you're a member of Congress, you can actually check a book out of the Library of Congress.
You could.
Do they return the books on time?
We keep track, but there are no fines.
No fines.
No fines, but we keep track. And now they can do ebooks and
Well, how do you
things.
tell a member of Congress, especially of a committee chair, by the way, your book's overdue? Do you send them a little notice or what do you do?
We do contact them and we keep up. And usually we work with staff members
Okay.
as well.
So you
But
get-
now the collection has grown to 171 million items, and it's really for Congress and the people it serves.
So anybody can now go to the Library of Congress and use it.
16, you can get a reader's card, and we work with a network, and David knows this, a network of libraries throughout
Okay.
the country and the world.
David, since I came of age, there's been something called digitization. So to be honest, it's nice that you have all these documents and everything, but why do we really need documents anymore? Because everything is digitized. Why don't we just put everything on a computer and get rid of all these pieces of paper you have?
Oh, David, if only we had digitized everything.
Oh, it's not, everything's not digitized?
everything.
No.
We have more than 15 billion pieces of paper and parchment. A very small percentage of them have been digitized. And the reason that we're digitizing is because people don't have to come to Washington in order to find out, to hold their government accountable. We want to get as much information to them at wherever they are, 24 hours a day.
Is it your plan eventually, or your successor's plan, you think it will be to digitize every single thing, or is that just unrealistic, too expensive, impractical?
That certainly is part of our strategic plan, is to digitize everything. We will never live to see
No.
it, but that's the goal.
Okay.
And it's coupled with the fact that now most of the information that's being generated has no paper equivalent. It's born digital. So there is no paper to be digitized later. So we're talking about our past history that's being
Okay.
digitized.
So one of your other responsibilities is to administer, if I understand it correctly, the presidential libraries. So we have a system that started with, I guess, FDR, and now we have every president has their own library. Does every president need his or her own library?
Yes, of course. Each one of those facilities delivers a different message about anyone can become the president of the United States. So most of these 14 now presidential libraries are sited in a town somewhere that has something to do with the life of that president. So you get an opportunity not only to learn with the records and artifacts of that administration, but the setting, to know that it's especially important for young people to think, to dream about becoming the president or a life in public service. And that's one of the fundamental roles that the presidential libraries play.
Okay, now the latest presidential library that's under construction is the presidential library for President Obama. But it's
Not a library.
It's not a library.
It's the Obama Presidential Center. It's the museum piece and the community center aspect of presidential library. Since about 95% of the Obama records were born digital, we are creating the first digital presidential library, no physical facility.
So if I go to the Obama Presidential Center and say, let me see some papers, they would say everything's digitized, or go to the
Why would you
National
do
Archives?
that? You wouldn't even have to do that. You could do that from home.
Okay.
So there will be a museum. So the artifacts, which still belong to the federal government.
Okay, let's suppose I want to go see some of these digitized assets you have, or papers, but there's a electricity shortage, and all of a sudden the electricity, our grid system goes down. Do we lose everything, or what happens during that period of time? Because everything's dependent on there being electricity, right?
That's one of the scary things about everything that we're doing these days. It's dependent upon an ancient technology, electricity. And it scares me to think what could happen if we're for long periods of time without electricity. That's why backup is very important, to ensure that it's not just one copy, but we have multiple copies. And the whole concept of now storing in the cloud to guarantee that there are multiple versions or copies of the digital information.
Well, take
Security.
cyber, for example, cyber.
Yeah.
People sometimes do cyber attacks.
Yeah.
That's what I was.
Could
gonna
somebody
say.
cyber attack and vacuum away all of your digital assets or something, or not?
We
really?
are in fact under attack now
Yes,
by Russian invasions of our systems.
yes.
Big concern going on right now in the federal government.
And a lot of, and the Library of Congress is part of a group, we all work together. Cybersecurity is one of our top priorities, and we've had to strengthen our defenses. We get about, Library of Congress gets about, I don't know, about 200,000 attempts or attacks a day
Yeah.
But the
in
Library
a
of
normal time.
the Library of Congress has lots of books, right?
And books, manuscripts, film, all of that.
Are you trying to digitize all of those?
No, not everything. And what the Library of Congress is trying to do is digitize the more unique materials, the papers of the 23 presidents from Washington to Coolidge that we have.
In other words, the
These
most
are-
valuable things you want to digitize.
Well, and the unique thing. So we don't need to, for instance, even if we have a copy of a bestseller or something like that, we don't need to digitize or do that. It's the unique parts of our collection that people literally would not, the papers of Rosa Parks, that you would have to come and before 36
Now,
Supreme
you
Court
have,
justices.
one of your valuable works is the Gutenberg Bible.
Yes,
So you're not digitizing that?
no.
Okay.
We
So-
sell a facsimile in the store.
Okay, so when people, let's suppose I'm an average citizen and I want to go visit the Library of Congress and I want to do a paper, I want to write a paper. And I just walk up to the Library of Congress, say, here I am, citizen, and I want to do some research. How do you do
Get
that?
you can actually get a reader's card, and I think a lot of people might not realize that it's 16, and we work a lot with the school systems and colleges and community colleges and things that people can actually go into the 19 reading rooms
Okay.
and request to see materials. Some materials are much more restrictive in terms of you can't say, I'd like to see Teddy Roosevelt's diary.
Well, I say, look,
That's not going to come
I'd
out.
like to wander around the stacks of the Library of Congress. Can you do that?
Not anymore.
Not anymore.
Not
Okay.
anymore. There used to be a time that you could, but now
Well,
that's
for
restricted.
both of you, there's a serious problem, which is people try to steal things from time to time. There was an incident a number of years ago where somebody took some documents, put them in his sock, I guess, and escaped with them, and he was subsequently indicted for that. But I assume when you have physical documents, people think that there's some value to getting them or something. So how do you deal with that first, David, and Carla, how do you deal with that problem?
Constant vigilance.
Yes.
It's this delicate balance between access and protection that we, all of us deal with every day to ensure that we have measures in place, security cameras, monitoring use, ensuring that we have line sight of people when they're using our materials, bag inspections when people are leaving, all those kinds of standard practices to protect. but still stuff gets away. And we have within our Inspector General office and within our facilities holdings protection folks who are monitoring trade sales, eBay, things like that for
Yes.
things that may have gotten away.
It's similar with the
Yeah.
library. It's similar, and especially the checking of bags and backpacks of staff as well, because some of the time it's
That's an important aspect.
Yes.
Most of the FBI tells me that most of this is insider theft. It's
In other words, it's possible that somebody could come in and from an outside, a public citizen, take something, but the bigger problem has historically been people that work there that know the
Yes.
system, they slip out. And sometimes when they slip out, they will say, well, I work here, so you don't have to worry about me. So they slip
right.
out.
And remember, file if you have a letter to Teddy Roosevelt from someone and we haven't stamped it or put a little thing on it, you could put it in a folder like
Right.
this.
Okay.
Just go
Now,
right out.
the world has changed.
Oh, I shouldn't have said that, but this is sunshine.
Don't give away the secrets, but the world's changed since COVID, obviously, and we're coming back to a more normalized system where people are coming back. But actually, how did you run during the COVID isolation period of time? David, how did you run the archives? Were you still coming in, or where were you working, or what are your people doing?
So I was still here and lonely in this building, me and the security folks. And across the country, many of our staff were teleworking and providing a fair amount of service remotely. One of the side benefits of this focus on digitization is that a fair amount of material is available now digitally. And so a fair number of those research questions could be answered by staff remotely. And we were fortunate to get to be a beneficiary of the first COVID bill, which allowed us to issue laptops to folks at home so they would be able to do some of the processing work and dealing with the public from home.
So, Carla, what were you doing during COVID?
Commuting occasionally from home and doing quite a bit of the telework. And we were also able to have staff members who could still process materials. We had a kind of drive-up system where a cataloger could come and actually pick up materials and take them and come back and all of that. So there was a lot of transcription that was going on, and the public helped us quite a bit too.
Yep.
So pre-COVID, how many people a year would come visit the National Archives?
Oh, that's not on your list of questions.
It's about a million and a quarter or something like that, maybe million and a half.
Well, that's the figure for the rotunda. But we have 40 facilities across the country. So
Yeah,
I would
so
have to get
much.
back to you on that.
Yeah,
Okay,
we had about 2 million
2 million a year,
going
okay.
into the Jefferson
So,
building.
all right, so you have
specifically.
lots of visitors and so forth. And when people come to the National Archives as a visitor, what do they most want to see? The Declaration of Independence?
Declaration of Independence, right?
Now, the Declaration of Independence that you have is pretty much faded. I mean, it's very faded. That's
But it
because
is the original.
the original is very faded,
It is
right?
very faded.
Yes, faded.
That's right.
Okay. So people, are they disappointed when they see how faded it is, or they don't care?
We quickly refer them to the stone copy that you've loaned to us so that they can see what it's supposed to look like.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Carla, what do most people want to see in the Library of Congress?
They really do want to see that Gutenberg Bible, and they want to also look into the main reading room. The
main reading
beautiful
room
dome,
is
and to look
gigantic,
into it. It's gigantic,
dome.
and that's where David McCullough, Doris Kearns Goodwin, and all of these authors sat there, and Alex Haley sat there and did their research, and so people
Well,
want to see
you have
that.
this main reading room,
It's
the big dome.
gorgeous.
It's one of the most beautiful rooms in the world. But if you walk through there and you're kind of researching something, but you fall asleep there, you don't kick people out of their sleeping, right?
No,
Because you let them.
We know they're taking just
Okay.
a brain pause. That's what we call it.
Okay, so David, what is the pleasure of being the National Archivist? What's the great pleasure of it? You were minding your own business. You're running the New York Public Library. Somebody calls you up and says, guess what? I'm speaking for the President of the United States. I want you to be the National Archivist. Did you say, is this a joke, or or why would I want to do this? Or,
I said I'm flattered, but you're looking at the wrong person. I'm a librarian. Why would you be hiring someone who knew the business? That was the exact conversation I had with Kyle Watkins, the 12-year-old undergraduate at Georgetown who made that, George Washington, who made that phone call on a Friday afternoon. And he said, well, would you think about it over the weekend? And he called back on Monday. And we had the same conversation. And 10 minutes later, an adult called and asked if he could come to New York and talk to me. And it was Tom Wheeler, who is on the former head of FCC, who's on the National Archives Foundation board, who kind of painted the picture of what the president was looking for in this new archivist in terms of the Open Government Initiative. And I became very interested in that. And the fact that my background fit very nicely with what they were looking for.
so did the president call you and say anything, or he just said?
No.
He didn't call you?
He didn't call me.
Okay.
You
So
don't get a
Carla, how did you
call,
get,
don't-
I mean, Carla, you
you
were
don't get the
well-known.
call.
You were the former head of the American Library Association, head of the
Right.
Pre-Neck Library in Baltimore, the head librarian in Chicago. How did you get your position, other than being qualified for it? Did the president call you and say?
No, he doesn't call. He has people. But what happened, my predecessor, Dr. Jim Billington, had been the Librarian of Congress for a number of years. And when he announced his retirement, the then administration, Obama administration, asked a group of librarians as part of other groups to just weigh in on what the Library of Congress could be going forward. And I was part of that group. And then I got a call from mine with Amanda Moose,
Oh,
a
yeah.
very seasoned though person with the administration who
Okay,
wondered if I'd
so
consider.
what's the pleasure of being a librarian of Congress?
It's like being in that opening up the treasure chest and having curators and librarians to say, could we come up because we've just purchased or we've had gift of, and then they bring it. So like being in a university and it's being in class every day, pinch me moments, that's the pleasure.
So if you're the archivist of the United States or you're the Librarian of Congress and you want to go to a restaurant and you have to stand in line, you're going to say, I'm the archivist of the United States, Librarian of Congress. Can you get a better reservation?
Have you had that happen? Or I haven't.
No.
No.
Doesn't happen.
No, it's not in DC.
And the two of us are not people who would throw our weight around
Right.
anyway.
So we usually wait in line and hope.
So have you had any presidents of the United States visit the archives?
Yes, yes.
Yes.
The former president had a very important meeting here on American history.
Okay.
Mhm.
Former presidents come.
Yes.
Okay?
And
you-
current presidents also.
okay?
And vice presidents and
Okay.
and cabinet members
Sure.
and speaker and things. It's a
So-
regular part.
Now, since it's a national archives, I assume 100% of the money that you need, you get from Congress. Is that right? You get everything from Congress you need to pay your budget? Is that right?
Not quite. We have a wonderful National Archives Foundation, which deals with private philanthropy. Very much focused on patriotic philanthropy. Thanks for your leadership in that
Yes.
arena.
So you have a foundation that contributes what Congress doesn't contribute to you.
It enables
And-
us to do all of our education and exhibition programming.
So the Library of Congress, do you get all your money from the government as well?
No, but we have the same wonderful philanthropic group, similar, the James Madison Council, and you're very much a part of that and head that up. And that has allowed us to not only acquire materials, but also do the
Okay.
exhibits and special things. That really helps.
So what about diversity, equity, and inclusion? Since you joined the library world it's changed a fair bit. Our whole society has changed. There's more concern about diversity, equity, inclusion, as there should be. In terms of your personnel that you hire, are you more sensitive to this than you used to be or than your predecessors used to be?
Very much more sensitive. In fact, we have completed the work on a task force that I established on racism to take a look at just that, how we are what has our history been in terms of hiring minorities? What are the opportunities for minorities to move to advance? What are the retention issues involved? So we're very much focused on that now. And I can tell you, since I'm getting ready to leave, I've been thinking a lot about what my management team looked like when I came here and what it looks like now. And
It was very diverse when you first came.
it was not diverse.
Okay. Well,
And I know that, yeah.
now, as a woman of color, I assume you are sensitive to these issues, but have you done a lot to improve the DEI, the diversity, equity, and inclusion at the Library of Congress?
I think we've moved forward quite a bit. And in fact, we just had a major barrier analysis. And that was really something, from the recruitment and retention to also just some of our basic policies in terms of staff and how their internal production. For instance, think about the fact that with the teleworking, and we talked about that people were able to do different things, but the staff members, and when the analysis, the people who couldn't telework were often the lower paid and from different
Now,
underrepresented groups. So you have to, it's a fulsome look at what are the barriers to progress.
David, the archives was in the news not long ago because Congress wanted some of your records and when litigation and so forth. Your position is whatever the law is, I comply with. In other words, if the court says I have to comply with the document, give it to Congress, you do. You don't get involved saying, I don't want to provide this. Is that right?
As much as I would like to.
So you don't do that.
I do not get involved in that. But if it's, there are situations where we may consult with Department of Justice on particularly sensitive documents.
So I don't have that big a personal library or that many documents in my home, but I know I can't even find the ones I'm supposed to find in my house. So if you have to find something, do you have any trouble actually finding it? Is everything really coded and you can, if you call somebody on your staff and say, I need this document, can you get it right away? Or they say, well, we're going to look for it. We'll get back in a week or so.
It's interesting because it's not usually a document. It's a vague description of the kind of information that someone's looking for. It's a standard reference transaction, trying to narrow down exactly what someone's looking for, because the original question is usually so broad that there are millions of records that would meet that. So we spend a lot of time trying to narrow down what exactly you're looking for.
Well,
And David, and I remember one of my most impressive visits to one of the presidential libraries, the one in Little Rock, the Clinton Library. And when the archivist there was talking about the processing of the boxes from staff. And she said there are some boxes, when staff are leaving administrations and they put in a box, those things have to be processed. And
but you can find everything.
No. And some things are misfiled.
Or some things are misfiled.
It's
So if a member of
Sunshine
Congress
Week.
says, I want a certain book.
That's easier. But the information that we can provide, the reports and things directly to them. But the processing of materials is and the arrearage, backlog.
So with physical documents, one of the problems is often they could be destroyed through a fire.
Yeah.
You have very good anti-fire systems, I assume?
Yes.
And that's not a big problem?
It was a big problem. It's something that we pay attention to, and the wake-up call came for a fire in St. Louis with our military records, where millions of records were destroyed.
Now, does it concern you or does it make you feel good that when you became the Archivist of the United States, they could go back and find letters that you wrote to presidents of the United States when you were a little boy? Does that concern you that we have too many files that we're keeping, or it shows you how great they are in keeping certain information? So can you describe these letters you wrote to presidents when you were 8 or 9?
It concerned me more that I had forgotten the letters than the fact that they found them. When I met with the directors of the presidential libraries for the first time, the director of the Kennedy handed me a copy of a letter that a kid wrote to the president asking for information about the proposed Peace Corps. And that was a stunning moment because it was a letter from me. But more stunning was to watch the faces of the other 12 at that point, directors, because they were like, oh my God, how am I going to top this? And 2 weeks later, the Eisenhower called to say they'd found 2 letters from me to President Eisenhower. And then at the LBJ, they found my letter to LBJ congratulating him for signing the Civil Rights Act. So it just felt like the stars were aligned and I was in the right place.
So
Really?
those
Oh,
letters are now
David.
in your office, but when you.
Copies.
Copies, oh, the originals, you keep the, okay, so you can keep the copies, but the originals are still here.
No,
Okay,
the copies are in the presidential libraries. I mean, the
okay,
originals are in the presidential libraries.
okay. All right, so Carla, in your case, if you want to check out a book, you can check out any book, right? You're not a member of Congress, but can you check out any book?
I possibly could. I'd have to
Good.
make arrangements
Oh,
though.
right, yeah,
I-
okay,
I
but
could
normally
see.
you just go to a bookstore if you need a book,
Right.
that's easier,
Yeah.
okay. So let's talk about why it's important to have all these records, because the truth is, sometimes people say government has too much information and maybe it'd be better not to have all this data. So what do you say about that, David?
More information is what we should be looking for, more access to information. And we're both in the business of making access happen, trying to figure out ways that we can make it easier for people to get at the information that they need. So for me, it's the working with the agencies to ensure that they're creating, maintaining, and then transferring to us those records in an appropriate manner. So that's monitoring guidance that we provide to each of the agencies, and ensuring that once we have it in our custody, that it's protected and that we can find it, that we can deliver.
Right.
So for a long time, there are certain things that you have that are not made public. Like, I think the things relating to President Kennedy's assassination were not made public for a while. I don't know if they're all public now or not, but
Not yet.
not yet.
Not
But they
yet.
will be at
We're-
some point. or-
We're getting closer and closer.
Okay, so there are certain things that are so secret or should be secret, or they're just not appropriate for public dissemination. Is that right? You still have a lot of that or some of that?
We do, and it's part of a larger problem having to do with how the classification system works and the
Okay.
over-classification problem.
And I just have to say, there's some things that the donor, for instance, the Supreme Court Justice papers, and we're working with the family and the state of Justice Sandra Day O'Connor, and Justice Ginsburg was also working with us. So there are certain things, we have the archives, for instance, of the NAACP and the Legal Defense Fund. Certain things, because of legal requirements or the requirements of the donor, you can't.
So some things
make
are not supposed to
accessible
be
for a
made
number of
available right away.
years and things like that.
In the case of Sandra Day O'Connor, she gave to you, or was it at the Supreme Court, her old files or something?
It depends, and that's where you work directly with the Supreme Court and you work with the family. So the personal letters, for instance, between the justice and her husband, that's the family's purview, but some of the case files and things are.
Well, one of her biographers, Evan Thomas,
He had
found a
access.
document. It was a marriage proposal from
Skilly?
William Rehnquist,
Yes.
when he was a former
Oh, my
law school
God.
student, to Sandra Day O'Connor, that nobody had remembered, but apparently he had
Wow.
proposed marriage anyway.
And see, that's in her personal papers.
Well, let's
and those
suppose
types of things.
somebody famous in the United States says, Carla, look, I would like to give my papers to the Library of Congress. And why should somebody want to give their papers to you? Do you give them, you pay them a lot of money for that, or?
No.
you-
No, you don't pay money, but you definitely assure the person or the organization, for instance, the Alva Daily Dance Theater, that their materials will be preserved and made accessible. That's that point,
Okay.
discoverable.
Right, so
going
somebody would
forward.
say, I'm going to give my papers to the Library of Congress. Presumably, if they're valuable, they get some tax deduction, but that's their business. And then you get, you presumably, if you think that it's worth it, you will digitize them, or
Process
something, as scholars could have in the future. But so somebody calls you up and says, I would like to give my papers to the Library of Congress, but they're not that prominent a person and you really don't want their papers. Does that happen?
Well, that's where you have, and we want things from, for instance, the Veterans History Project. And we have oral histories and now Gold Star families that we want the diaries, we want the letters, the American Folk Life Center, different groups that are that. So we have a full program of documenting, we want everyone's history. And there are ways that we can work with people with that too, communities, churches, all types.
But how do you
of
tell
groups.
people who think they're important that their papers aren't really of that much interest to the Library of Congress. Do you ever tell them that, or you have somebody else do that?
No, we really, it's almost like a counseling session where you
Oh.
work with the person and say, your alma mater, or
Oh,
it
okay.
might be more appropriate. And David has been in those conversations where it might.
That's
be
why
more-
it's so nice in the government that I don't have to.
You don't have to do that,
So
but you try to work with the person to think about where the best
Okay.
place would be.
So David, if somebody wants to look at National Archives documents, is it like the Library of Congress? They can come here and sign up and just go through the archives that you have, or how do they actually get access to things? The average person or the scholar?
So one of the features that helped us make it through the COVID situation is consultation, pre-visit consultation. So we have some sense of what people are looking for, and we can have the material waiting for them when they get here, rather than wasting their time
Right.
on searches that we don't have the material to supply.
And that's
for them.
similar with the library too.
So David, what are some of the most memorable things? I mean, you have an award you give out every year to people like Ken Burns. I think you gave it to Lin-Manuel and other people like that. So were any of those particularly memorable when you meet Lin-Manuel or famous people come here, and you do that a lot?
That was an interesting one because we were honoring Lynn, Tommy Kail, the director, and Ron Chernow, who wrote the book. And so as you know, preceding the dinner of the evening, we do a document display. And the three of them and myself and one of our curators looking over some of the material that Ron used in writing the book. And then the conversation, this is the most wonderful, the conversation between Ron and Lynn and the argument they had over what really happened. Those are the kinds of moments that stick in
Those
my
are the
mind.
moments.
So Carla, you have an award at the Library of Congress, now about 20 years old, to give a Gershwin Prize out to a songwriter. And just most recently, you did it to Lionel Richie. So is that fun when you have a
Oh, my
concert and you meet these
goodness.
people?
It's so wonderful because it's named the George and Ira Gershwin Prize for Popular Song, and the library has the archive of George and Ira Gershwin, including George Gershwin's piano. And Lionel Richie actually sat down at that piano and played Embraceable You. And it was like, oh my goodness.
Now, I think
So-
it was in the late 1800s, maybe 1870 or so, where Congress said, if you want to have a copyright, you have to send 2 copies of your book,
Yes.
let's say, to Library of Congress, and they will give you a copyright. Is that still, people still do that?
Yes, 1870 is when the Library of Congress became formally the administrator of the US copyright system. And part of registration for copyright is the deposit requirement. And so it's not just books, it's video games now and wallpaper, anything that's being copyrighted, there's that. So the library, you get about 20,000 items for deposit every working day. And the library gets to select from that grouping, and we select about 15,000 items
I mean,
to
everybody
be added to the collection.
up to the collection, but suppose somebody writes a book and your people don't think it's such a great book, you still give it a copyright, right?
Oh, yes, the copyright system is separate.
Okay.
So the library gets to actually select from the
Oh,
deposit.
so
So
the-
no wallpaper. We don't do that.
So what do you do if they send you 2 copies and you don't really want them? You just,
Well, there's a warehouse
Okay.
and an inventory of deposits, so that's separate. And
Okay.
they have to keep that one copy for the
so
deposit.
what's the greatest pleasure you've had of being librarian of Congress?
Working with the staff members. We have so many wonderful items, and I know you have the treasures and things like that, but then when you put those items with a curator who can tell you about Grant's letters to his wife, or you can really make the materials come alive. That's
I
the
know
kismet.
both of you have employees who've been there 20 years, 30 years, sometimes
50.
40 years, 50 years. But how do you hold on to these people? Because, you know, you pay government salaries, which are not generally that generous, relatively speaking. They don't go up that much either annually. So is it hard to hold on to people and attract new people?
It's not hard to attract new people. People are, because of technology and the way information is being generated and shared now, These are attractive institutions to work, but they're also, and we've grown up in institutions that are populated by people who make this their career, a
Yes.
lifetime career, because of the mission of the institution. That information of collecting and protecting, and most importantly, making information available. There's a passion that people bring to that.
Dedication.
Carla, what about you? Do you have a hard time holding on to people or?
No, and in fact, the people are so dedicated. Ms. Connie, she's well known from the manuscripts division, and she retired after 52 years, and now she volunteers and is giving tours around the library and talking about
Well,
it.
that's a good answer, but you would be better to say, no, I need more money from Congress to pay my people more. You don't have to say
Well,
that.
there's that.
Of course, and I
You
need
do.
more people.
Okay,
Yes,
you need
there
more
you
people.
go. But
How many actually employees do you actually have at the archives?
2,700 across the 40 facilities.
2,700. And what about the Library of Congress?
3,500.
3,500. Hey, David, the archives administers the presidential library system. Have you been to a lot of these libraries?
All of them,
You've been to all of them.
Yeah.
of course.
You've been to every presidential
Oh,
library.
for God's sakes, David. I've been on the job for 12 years.
Okay, so the most visited presidential library, I was told, is the Ronald Reagan Library. Is that right?
And they told you that, right?
They did, actually. But that's not right.
It is right, yes.
And the least visited is at the Herbert Hoover one.
West Branch, Iowa, in the middle of a cornfield.
So it's not that many people going there, right? Okay. So when you go to these presidential libraries, do you have to stand in line with everybody else, or you don't have to stand in line?
Most of them know me by now.
They know
so,
you. Okay. All right.
And they know you're coming
So-
too, don't they?
Those
Carla,
are, they're interesting. It's an interesting kind of piece of the responsibilities, because it's a relationship among the federal government, a private foundation, and the family. So a lot of my responsibility is kind of stewardship, ensuring that relationship, three-way relationship is working.
Okay, so Carla, you presumably go to libraries around the country, right?
Mhm. And the Library of Congress has the 3 buildings in Washington, DC, and then the facility in Culpeper, Virginia for recorded sound and film. And that they actually have a theater there
Now, you have 3 main buildings
in Capitol, right?
in Washington. One is named after Jefferson. Why did he get a building?
Well, it's Thomas Jefferson.
Well, but he sold,
He sold the collection,
right.
and he's really the intellectual foundation of the growth of
Okay.
the library. So,
John Adams, why did he get a building named after?
He was the president that actually
Right.
started the library, and then
James
James
Madison?
Madison.
Why does he
And
get
the
a building?
James Madison building actually is the only official monument to him in Washington, DC. And so when you think about what Madison, in terms of his legacy, those are the 3 main
And it is
people.
said that James Madison was the person who had the idea for a Library of Congress,
Yes.
but it took Congress 17 years to actually pass that bill. But
Yes,
Congress hasn't
and
moved
I
that
think we
quickly.
can understand that these days.
Yes.
That
So, David, when you retire, if you don't unretire, if you don't unretire and you retire on April 30th, what do you plan to do with your time?
we talked about this before.
Well, we're going to make up for lost time and do some traveling and relax and kind of decompress, and then one day at a time.
Okay, and but when you want to come back to National Archives, you won't have to stand in line outside or anything like that. They'll probably get you in quickly.
I don't know. I don't. We'll see. We'll see. Depends on who the next archivist is, I suppose.
They'll let you.
The biggest, I asked you what the greatest pleasure was. What's the biggest headache associated with being the Archivist of the United States?
I think you have a sense of it based on the news over the last couple of months about just people following rules and ensuring that this is kind of widespread, this policing of the agencies and the White House about record keeping.
So what you're referring to is, as I understand, I worked in the White House as a young man, and I remember when we left under the Carter administration, they said every piece of paper is actually owned by the government. And actually, before, I think Richard Nixon, all the documents in the White House were owned by the president. Is that right, more or less? So now everything,
He
every
thought so, yes.
every document, every tweet, every digital anything is owned by the US government. Is that right?
That's right.
And so people aren't supposed to take them.
That's right. That's
And
it.
is
Those are
that-
the rules.
Has that been a problem for you or you're dealing with it? Okay.
And that's Presidential Records Act. That's not Federal Records Act. So
Oh, Presidential Records Act. Okay.
Yeah.
So Carla, what's the biggest downside or problem with being a librarian of Congress other than, having to have questions from me to you about
No.
things like this? What is your biggest downside?
Well, I would call it a challenge, and it has to do with that digital forward movement and making sure that we can keep up with the digital environment. And that's where the resources come in, getting talent, all of those things. So when you look to the future and we're preserving, we have so many items that we've been very expert at preserving, paper and things like that. But now when you look to a digital future and preserving and keeping up, that's.
And
that's
it's all dependent upon investment in technology infrastructure. And
Yes.
that's something that the government is not good at.
Right.
Um,
So if the White House is now looking for somebody to be your successor, if somebody who's a candidate calls you up and says, David, the White House has said, maybe I'm a candidate. Do you think I should take this job? What would you say to somebody? Take this
Yes.
job or maybe think about it twice?
Well, it depends on who's asking the question.
Well, let's suppose it's a friend of yours.
Oh. I would be very, very honest with them and tell them the upside and the downside.
So you would encourage them to do it. And you think the best qualification to be Archivist of the United States is to be a librarian or to be what? What would you think is the best qualification?
I just, based on my own
Wonderful.
experience, I think my library background contributed to our ability to move forward. And I still remember when the announcement was made about my nomination on one of the listservs, history listservs, Harriet, I don't know, she didn't have her last name, said, he's only a librarian.
So
I've had that too.
David, we always like to think of the United States, we're the best at everything, but do we have the best archive system in the world, or who do you think is good? If we're not the best, who's better than us, or who's the second best?
We're one of the leaders. We have a very close working relationship with Canada, UK, and Australia. And we are probably at the same level in terms of our control of the digital world.
Right.
So would you recommend that somebody come and visit the National Archives, but they can see historic documents, and you do recommend to people that's a good place to come get a tour?
Exactly. And we're focused now on, we haven't talked about this, but we're really focused on civic education
Yes.
because of just the disappearance of civics in the curriculum now. So we spent a lot of time on that agenda.
Very
And
much
Carla, do we have the best library? The Library of Congress is the best library in the world, would you say?
It's definitely one of the leaders. And when you think of national libraries, the top three would be the British Library and Bibliothèque Nationale. So in
Okay.
terms of leading with that.
So when you go around the country visiting people, what is the most frequent question you get asked?
Well, because I'm a librarian, they want to know what my favorite item is in the
Right.
library's collection. And I always
Right.
say, well, I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, so it's,
But when you're the Librarian of Congress, you got to be reading a lot of books because that's.
oh, they always
the-
want to know
what
what's
you're
on
reading,
your-
right?
What you're reading, what's on your bedstand, what's that, what was
Mm.
your favorite, what's your favorite book? It's like, I haven't read it yet, but I can tell you what books had been meaningful to me. in
And
my
you
life.
read fiction and nonfiction?
Fiction, nonfiction, cereal boxes. I mean, I'm a reader.
But when an author sends you a personal copy of his or her
Oh.
book, you have to, what do? You have to read it or you don't read it. But if you run into that person again, what do you say?
Thank you.
Okay. Now, in terms of literacy, our country has a very big illiteracy problem. 14% of adults in this country cannot read past a fourth grade level. Is there anything that the US government can do more than we've already done to kind of get people to learn how to read?
So, well, the Library of Congress, and you've been very helpful with that, gives out literacy awards to literacy organizations. So you support the organizations that are doing the work. And adult illiteracy is even more troubling at times because there are people who can read, but they don't read.
Right.
And
That's
you
called
can tie
illiteracy.
Yeah, and you can tie people's advancement in life to their literacy levels.
I think I read that something like 30% of people who have college degrees never read another book after they graduate from
Ever.
college.
Ever.
Yeah. I know.
So, David, if you could meet any president whose library you have visited, who would you like to meet and ask him a question? What would you ask any of these presidents,
Well,
or
it has to be
anybody
him,
that
though.
you really say, look, your documents weren't in very good shape, or why didn't you do this better? Anybody question you would like to ask any of the presidents you visited their libraries?
I think, I grew up in Massachusetts, very much influenced by the Kennedys. I was in high school when he was elected. He's the person I think that I would like to meet.
Right.
In terms of questions I would have, no specific questions about the records.
So, Carla, you can,
FDR.
if you can meet any author who's ever written anything,
Oh my
who would
God.
you like to meet and have dinner with? Is there anybody, I don't know who would it be,
Well,
but
I actually had that experience with Doris Kearns
Yeah.
Goodwin.
really?
Yes,
Okay.
and it was on the first year anniversary, and they asked me for the New York Times when, that thing with who would you, I had Oscar Wilde, James Baldwin, and Doris Kearns Goodwin for dinner, and she actually called.
Wow.
And it was a dream because we talked about civic education and the
Mm.
history never stops and what you're going to collect in the future and her view. And
Wow.
it just was the magical.
Well, she's great.
Time.
I love her books. I've interviewed her many times, but why not Shakespeare? I mean, you could ask him who wrote those plays, right?
Yeah, but then we'd have to, the Folger Shakespeare,
That's true.
they would get on us a little bit about that. But in terms of someone who makes history come alive and accessible, if you
Right.
read No Ordinary Time, you know how it ends, or you know what it is. So,
David, when presidents have taped their Oval Offices, I think
Mhm.
FDR might have done some, John Kennedy
Hmm.
did some, Lyndon Johnson did some, we obviously know Nixon did some. Those tapes, are they in the National Archives?
They are. They're in
And
the
you ever, when
presidential
you have
library.
some spare time, you ever go listen to those tapes and say, hey, what was really
Most of
going
them
on
have
here?
been, transcribed and are available online. You can do that yourself.
Okay. So if you were giving any advice to your successor about the best thing to do in this job, what would you tell him or her? There's never been a female archivist, has there?
No, I would, and that's advice I've given to the White House already, that you better not hire another white male. That we've had 10 white males. What advice would I give that person? Fight for more money. Get to know your staff. You have an extraordinary staff. Don't bring a posse in here, and get to know your talent before you make any moves, and learn the history of the agency.
So
Right.
now the position of Librarian of Congress, your position has no fixed term, is that right?
Right.
So President appoints you, but there's no fixed term.
Right.
So you're retiring just because you want to retire.
I want this administration to be the administration that replaces me.
Okay. It used to be that the Librarian of Congress was appointed for life.
Same, yeah, that was that.
Used to be appointed for life, but it's changed now. And it's a 10-year appointment and then can be renewed for another 10 years. Is that right?
Right, and it was interesting because I'm the first female and the first person of color. When people found out about that change, they thought, oh, is it because you're the first female and the first person of color?
Oh,
And
yeah.
I tell them, no, that group that was advising was saying this, because of what's happening in libraries and the profession, you need to have a term. And so we support that as a profession, that you need to have a term.
So you are in your, what year now?
The 6th, I'm going into the
Okay,
6th
so you have
year,
another
the 10.
4 years plus, and you can be reappointed for another 10 years if you
I'm
want.
older than I look, so.
So
I might not-
Whenever
I know.
you,
Yeah, you know how old I am.
whenever you decide after your second term to do something else, let's say, what would be your advice to your successor?
My advice would center around looking at what the possibilities are with technology, the programming, the digitizing, how you can let more people know that the Library of Congress is for them and they can use the things that the library has.
So on behalf of the American people, I'd like to thank both of you for your public service. You've done a great job. I know you both, and you've really worked tirelessly in these jobs, and I've enjoyed a chance to work with both of you. And David, I wish you weren't retiring, but I understand that sometimes people like to retire. But if you unretire, I'm sure nobody will be upset. And Carl, I hope you'll be doing this for many, many years.
And I'm looking forward to that call from Tom Brady.
Okay, well, thank you all very much. Okay, thank you.
Please join me in thanking David, Carla, and David for a very robust discussion of open government and transparency at the archives and the Library of Congress. You've certainly given us all a lot to think about. Our remaining presenters are virtual, so OGIS asked a number of stakeholders to record brief videos answering the question, what do open government and transparency mean to you? Please join me for the next 7 or so minutes as we listen to representatives from non-governmental organizations, academia, and the press share what open government and transparency means to them.
Hi, my name is Ginger Quintero McCall, and I'm the legal director at Demand Progress. I was also previously Oregon's first public records advocate, and I've worked as a FOIA attorney both in the federal government and in the advocacy community. What open government and transparency mean to me can best be summarized in a story from the beginning of my career when I was working at the Electronic Privacy Information Center. EPIC had heard about the airport body scanners that were being rolled out across the country, and we had significant privacy concerns about them. But before we could launch a meaningful public campaign, we needed to get more facts. So we submitted a series of public records requests to the US Department of Homeland Security. The documents that we received in response indicated that the machines were both very invasive and that they were not particularly effective at picking up powdered explosives, which were the primary threat at the time. The documents also indicated that the machines could potentially store and export the very graphic images that they were producing. Armed with these documents, EPIC was able to go to the press and to the public and advocate for meaningful reforms related to these machines. The machines that you see in the airport these days are much more privacy protective, and that is a direct result of the public records requests and lawsuits that EPIC filed, and the documents that we received back in response. That to me is the promise of open government and transparency, that it allows citizens to better understand what the government is doing on their behalf, and then to advocate for reforms which will better reflect the actual will of the public. Government transparency is essential for an informed citizenry and a meaningful democracy. Thank you.
I'm Ryan Mulvey. I'm a policy counsel at Americans for Prosperity Foundation. I'm also honored to serve as the president of the American Society of Access Professionals. Our society is stronger when people can hold those in power accountable. Whether you're a journalist, an activist, or a concerned citizen, the right to access government information is an important tool for achieving that goal. Research shows that robust and effective freedom of information laws increase civic participation, reduce corruption, and improve fiscal management. Transparency, in short, fosters mutual trust between the governed and their leaders. It's not only the principled thing to do, it also has positive practical consequences. I'm proud to be a strong advocate for open government. That means not settling for the status quo. Transparency requires vigilance. Opening the government is an ongoing effort that entails consideration of the needs and motivation of the federal bureaucracy, the press, government watchdogs, and the broader requester community. As a frequent requester and FOIA educator, I always value the opportunity to interact with FOIA and Privacy Act professionals. The relationship between requesters and the government is too often cast as adversarial, and reasonable minds do often disagree about whether a particular record is exempt. But even with those differing perspectives, we are all working towards the same goal. We all care about transparency, and we all acknowledge that open government is an important foundation for a free and prosperous society, a society that respects the rule of law and is unafraid for people to know what their government is up to.
I love the Freedom of Information Act because it's pretty incredible that there's a law that gives the public a fighting chance to force the government to release records to the public that the government itself would rather keep secret.
Hi, my name is Beminde Johnson, and I'm currently an associate professor of government at Hamilton College. When I think of open government and transparency, a few things come to mind. First, I think of a government that proactively shares its information with the public whenever possible. As we know, there are mechanisms in place that allow individuals to directly request information. However, this process can sometimes be complex for those who may have less experience interfacing with the government in this way. Through the proactive sharing of information, it helps simplify the process of becoming a more informed individual. Now, of course, as we know, there are going to be circumstances where it is important to make direct requests to government offices for information, particularly sensitive information. In these instances, open government and transparency means having the resources in place to help individuals navigate this process if they ever do need assistance. So, for example, if someone needs help knowing who to ask or what type of information they can ask for, are there resources available to help? So one quick example, the Office of Government Information Services, they aid and assist FOIA requesters navigate the process every single day. Open government is truly only open if it's widely accessible. And part of that involves making sure there are resources in place to help individuals understand the type of information that they can have access to. And as I said earlier, open government and transparency means the proactive sharing of information whenever possible. Thank you.
Happy Sunshine Week, everyone. My name is Lauren Harper, and I'm the Public Policy Director at the National Security Archive. I'm hard-pressed to think of a better time to highlight the importance of open government and transparency, both at home and abroad. The war in Ukraine highlights the fundamental importance of transparency and intelligence sharing. The Biden administration's sharing of declassified intelligence on Russian invasion plans was crucial, and an example of global public interest clearly outweighing the impetus for secrecy, and should set the standard going forward. Here in the US, our lawmakers are pressing to find the truth of what the Trump administration knew about the January 6th insurrection and when. They will prevail, but are facing steep obstacles, in no small part because of the terrible record-keeping practices of the former president. The silver lining here is that this should serve to draw a bright line in the federal government that preservation should be the default. What can we gain with a robust whole of government transparency regime? NAR has already shown us with the Argentina Declassification Project. Some 7,500 CIA, FBI, DOD, NSC, and State Department records, 47,000 pages in total, all concentrated on human rights abuses in that country, were handed over to the Argentine government in 2019. Archivist David Ferriero, who we'll all miss, said that reviewers worked for a total of 32,000 hours to complete the task and were able to release the documents 97% unredacted. We know that NAR's responsibility is outsized, that its staff is dedicated, and that it usually doesn't get the recognition it deserves. Because of that, we'll continue to work to highlight how important NAR is and its need for robust funding, so that we all have access to our government's records and a fuller appreciation of our history. Thank you, and happy Sunshine Week.
Thank you, Ginger Quintero McCall, Ryan Mulvey, Nate Jones, Beminde Johnson, and Lauren Harper for bringing open government and transparency to life for us. What a fitting way to observe Sunshine Week. To end our Sunshine Week celebration today, we are thrilled to welcome Senator Patrick Leahy, who graciously pre-recorded a video message. Senator Leahy is a longtime promoter of open government and transparency. He has played a key role in every amendment to the Freedom of Information Act since 1975, and when he began serving in the United States Senate. Senator Leahy has worked with members on both sides of the aisle to enhance and expand Americans' access to information about what the government is up to. Of particular significance for the National Archives, Senator Leahy was a main sponsor of the Open Government Act of 2007, which made the first significant reforms to FOIA in more than a decade. The Open Government Act, which became law in 2007, created the Federal FOIA Ombudsman's Office, the Office of Government Information Services. Like Archivist David Ferriero, Senator Leahy is retiring at the end of this year after 8 terms, 48 years. Without further ado, over to Senator Leahy.
I'd like to sincerely thank my friend David Ferriero, the Archivist of the United States, for hosting this important Sunshine Week event. Now, this year's Sunshine Week is particularly meaningful to me. It's going to be my last as U.S. Senator. David, we're here together, and being a part of this annual event, and more importantly, being a part of this community of transparency and open government advocates, that's been one of the most important and gratifying aspects of my Senate career. I've long believed that transparency is not just a nice optional feature to have in a democracy. It's a fundamental pillar of a democracy. The American people's right to know what their government is doing, and that's enshrined in FOIA, our nation's premier transparency law. That's essential to protecting against abuses by the powerful. The transparency tool lets the American people serve as a check against government wrongdoing. It reflects a simple but I think profound principle that a government of, by, and for the people cannot be one whose actions are hidden from them. Over the last few decades, I've worked with you all to bring a little more sunshine into the halls of power. Together, we've updated the Freedom of Information Act. We've enacted amendments to the law several times, but in significant ways. For example, we brought FOIA into the modern internet era. We want to ensure that Americans are able to interface with their government. They do that with companies and their communities. They should be able to do it with their government. And together, most recently, we enshrined a presumption of openness in the law. We did this to prevent agencies from blindly withholding information without having a clear rationale for doing so. Now, I know that there's a lot more work that remains to be done to improve FOIA and expand transparency. FOIA request backlogs are unacceptably long. Agencies still routinely abuse FOIA exemptions. They do that to withhold information that clearly should be available to the public. Agencies continue to exploit loopholes in the court system, which hides information from public scrutiny. But even worse, they fail to comply with transparency mandates that Congress imposed on them by statute. All of this needs to change. Now, I'm not giving up on the fight. I'm working with Republicans and Democrats in both the Senate and the House, drafting another bipartisan FOIA reform effort, one that would further strengthen our premier transparency law. I'm going to keep on working to come up with strong and bold legislation that actually has a real chance of passage in this Congress. I'll continue to fight for transparency. I'll do that and for a more open government. I'll do that until the very last day of my Senate career. Now, I may not be participating in next year's Sunshine Week event as a senator, but please know as a citizen, I'm always going to be with you in spirit. Your mission to make our government more accessible to the people, that's among the noblest of causes. After all, democracy is premised on the consent of the governed. And the governed simply cannot consent without knowing what their government is doing. Keep up the good work. Don't stop fighting this good fight. Please remember, there's always going to be a man named Patrick Leahy, whether or not he has the word senator before his name, who's always going to be in your corner, cheering you on. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Senator Leahy. We very much appreciate your taking the time out of your busy congressional schedule to share your thoughts with us. Thank you to everyone who participated in today's event. And thank you to our virtual viewing audience for joining us for this special celebration of Sunshine Week at the National Archives. A special thank you to the amazing OGIS staff who was instrumental in planning and executing this great afternoon, to Special Assistant to the Archivist Maureen McDonald, and to our special events and AV staff for ensuring that everything ran smoothly. If you would like to learn more about the work that OGIS does, please visit our website, archives.gov/OGIS, OGIS. Please read our blog, The FOIA Ombudsman, and follow us on our Twitter handle at FOIA_ombuds. Thank you again for joining us for our Sunshine Week celebration, and we hope you will join us again next year.